When the Titanic sank in 1912, the world was given a simple answer. They said an iceberg was responsible.
But history is rarely that simple.
Because ships do not sink from ice alone.
They sink because of decisions.
And tonight, we examine the secrets behind the history.
The Titanic began her journey as a symbol of confidence. Confidence in technology. Confidence in progress.
She represented the peak of human engineering.
And that confidence would later be questioned.
The responsibility rested on experienced hands. But experience does not prevent mistakes.
Warnings were sent. Some were delayed. And speed was never reduced.
This was not an accident yet.
It was a sequence. A chain of responsibility. The iceberg was only the final trigger, not the cause. The Titanic was still moving at full speed through dangerous waters. Multiple ice warnings were sent to the Titanic that night. But not every warning reached the Titanic's bridge.
On the bridge, the Titanic appeared safe.
The sea around the Titanic was unusually calm.
Without waves, spotting ice ahead of the Titanic became harder.
Darkness reduced reaction time for the Titanic. When the iceberg appeared, the Titanic had seconds to respond.
The warning reached the Titanic too late.
The Titanic attempted to avoid a direct collision.
The iceberg tore open multiple sections of the Titanic.
The Titanic's design assumed limited flooding. But the damage exceeded Titanic's safety limits.
Engineers quickly understood the Titanic would not survive.
The command to prepare lifeboats was given on the Titanic.
But the Titanic carried lifeboats for only half the people on board. Many Titanic passengers did not understand the danger.
Critical time was lost during the Titanic evacuation. At this moment, the fate of the Titanic was sealed.
The Titanic was still afloat, but time was running out.
As water spread, the Titanic's balance began to fail.
The Titanic was designed for theory, not reality.
Investigations later questioned the Titanic's materials.
The Titanic's structure failed under pressure. The Titanic disaster followed a predictable sequence. Company policies influenced how the Titanic was operated. Speed was prioritized aboard the Titanic. Public expectation shaped Titanic's decisions. But responsibility aboard the Titanic was shared. Confusion slowed the Titanic evacuation. The Titanic carried lifeboats for regulation, not survival. Many Titanic lifeboats left partially filled. Every minute, the Titanic sank deeper. Time became the Titanic's greatest enemy. Order was maintained aboard the Titanic. At this stage, the freezing water around the Titanic sealed many fates. Help was closer to the Titanic than many realized. The Titanic sent distress signals into the night. Not all Titanic signals were understood.
Communication failures deepened the Titanic tragedy.
The Titanic was now breaking its own limits. The Titanic was never designed for this angle.
Pressure overwhelmed the Titanic's frame.
In silence, the Titanic prepared to fall. This was the final chapter of the Titanic above water. The Titanic reached a point beyond recovery.
On the Titanic, panic existed without sound.
The silence aboard the Titanic became unsettling. The Titanic's power supply began to fail.
Even tradition aboard the Titanic continued without sound.
The ocean slowly claimed the Titanic. The Titanic's structure reached its limit. The Titanic began to tear itself apart. The Titanic broke under its own weight.
One half of the Titanic vanished into darkness.
The remaining Titanic stood briefly against gravity.
Then the Titanic followed.
The Titanic was gone.
What remained of the Titanic drifted silently.
Survivors of the Titanic waited in darkness. The cold surrounding the Titanic claimed many lives.
Morning revealed the cost of the Titanic disaster.
Rescue came too late for most of the Titanic. The Titanic survivors carried lifelong silence. The sea closed over the Titanic's story. Investigations sought to understand the Titanic tragedy.
No single individual was blamed for the Titanic.
The Titanic disaster had multiple causes.
The Titanic was not sunk by one person.
The Titanic was sunk by a system.
The Titanic still rests on the ocean floor.
The Titanic remains a warning.
The answer lies in human decisions.
Confidence sank the Titanic. The Titanic was not defeated by ice alone. It was sunk by human choice.
The story of the Titanic did not end when the ship disappeared.
What followed the Titanic disaster was a global search for answers.
Official investigations were launched into the Titanic tragedy.
Survivors of the Titanic provided silent testimony.
The Titanic disaster was examined step by step. The first question focused on Titanic's speed. The Titanic maintained near maximum speed. Despite warnings, the Titanic did not slow down. These decisions placed the Titanic at risk. Despite warnings, the Titanic did not slow down. These decisions placed the Titanic at risk.
The Titanic was under experienced command. But responsibility aboard the Titanic was shared. Attention then turned to the company behind the Titanic.
Commercial pressure influenced how the Titanic sailed. The Titanic was expected to impress the world. Arrival mattered more than caution for the Titanic.
Investigators also questioned the Titanic's design. The Titanic was believed to be safer than it truly was. Material quality became part of the Titanic investigation.
The Titanic was not failed by one mistake.
Attention soon shifted toward the system that operated the Titanic.
The Titanic was managed under commercial expectations.
Public pressure shaped how the Titanic was meant to perform. The Titanic was not instructed to slow down.
Operational culture influenced Titanic decisions at sea.
Orders aboard the Titanic followed accepted practice.
Safety rules governing the Titanic were outdated. The Titanic met legal standards, not moral ones. Compliance did not guarantee survival on the Titanic.
The Titanic reflected a wider industry failure.
Industry assumptions were carried onto the Titanic.
The Titanic was built to standards of its era.
Later studies questioned Titanic material choices.
Environment played a role in how the Titanic failed.
The Titanic was pushed beyond assumed limits. The Titanic sailed through a known danger zone.
Information existed before the Titanic struck ice.
Communication systems aboard the Titanic were limited.
The Titanic disaster formed through accumulation. The Titanic was guided by accepted practices of its time. No single order directly doomed the Titanic. The Titanic followed a system built on confidence. Comfort overshadowed caution aboard the Titanic.
The Titanic was celebrated before it was tested.
Expectation created pressure on the Titanic.
The Titanic reflected industry-wide thinking.
Regulations failed to evolve with ships like Titanic.
The Titanic met rules that were already outdated.
Nature exposed the limits of the Titanic's design.
The Titanic was never tested for such conditions. The Titanic sailed into a known hazard zone. The Titanic had information, but not urgency.
Time removed every remaining margin for the Titanic.
The iceberg was only the final event for the Titanic.
The Titanic was sunk by accumulation.
No single person sank the Titanic.
The Titanic was failed by a system.
The ocean keeps the Titanic silent.
The Titanic remains where history left it.
The Titanic continues to deteriorate.
Answer is not a single name.
The Titanic was undone by belief.
Belief without caution sank the Titanic.
The Titanic teaches restraint.
The Titanic changed maritime safety forever.
Lessons were written in the Titanic's loss.
The Titanic reshaped global regulations.
The Titanic was not sunk by ice alone.
It was sunk by human systems.
It was sunk by human systems.
Systems built on confidence, not caution.
The Titanic paid the price. The Titanic must be remembered. Not as a mystery, but a lesson. The Titanic rests in silence.
The answer was never simple.
History points to human choice. That choice sank the Titanic.
The Titanic was not defeated by nature alone. It was undone by human confidence.